All right, welcome back to another episode of the Product Builders Podcast. Today here with Sean O'Shea of Majestyk Apps. Sean, thanks for joining on here today.
Thanks for having me again.
So today we're going to be talking all about mobile DevOps. And to kind of kick things off for anyone in the audience, can you share just, really what is mobile DevOps to kind of start?
Yeah. At the end of the day, DevOps is really the process of really developing, testing, releasing, and monitoring a product. And it's really it's a cycle. So you code, you then test it, and then once you're ready to release it to either beta testers or the public, you have a release plan, and that's usually phased. And then you monitor it after that. So how is it working? Is it crashing? Are there any issues? And then this just goes in a cycle, and really each phase is no phase is more important than the other. And at the end of the day, if you can kind of really get in a solid cycle here, this is where you can really produce really solid, stable releases where it's less of a headache for really everyone on the team, from the developers, QA engineers, product managers, to customer support and success, and whoever's managing your app store reviews and whatnot. Where the better a release can be, the more stable it can be. It makes everybody's life definitely a lot easier.
Yeah, so I think you're kind of already hitting on this, but I mean, why is it so important that mobile app teams invest in mobile DevOps and everything? Why is it so important?
So I kind of got into the ability where it can help alleviate a lot of pain points for different members of the team or teams, whether it's like I said, product, QA, customer support, etc. But on top of that, it's just in general for security, and it's just better to be deploying via a DevOps process, and building via whether even it's just for internally or internal use, because at the end of the day, it's a clean environment. You don't have developers with passwords and whatnot and secrets and API keys and all that spread across all their machines. If you do this cleanly, you can have, well, at least the production ones, you can make it a bit cleaner where they don't have access to all that. And then on top of that, if you're building, one person's building the app every time, it takes a lot of time. So some apps can take anywhere from 5 to 30 plus minutes to build, depending on how big it is and how many dependencies there are and whatnot. Where you don't want to have someone sitting there waiting 30 minutes for the app to build, so then they can upload it somewhere to then distribute to the test team, or a team of testers. And then also you want to actually have a number of scripts and automations run as well, where your unit tests run. If you have UI tests, they run. And then if you have any more automated tests that run on different devices, where the big thing with Android applications, there's so many different phones out there these days where it's very fragmented, where you probably want to test on a number of different devices. So you can trigger that all automatically with either every commit a developer pushes or on specific workflows. So it's pretty important to just have that in place, where it's a time saver. It's more secure, where you can keep all of your secrets and whatnot and API keys stored there for production, and not all over the place. And there's no one point of failure. So if the developer that's releasing it every time is sick, you're kind of stuck if you don't have a system like this in place.
Yeah, that's makes sense, and it's super powerful. Just how robust it makes it, and it's no longer dependent on one person. You kind of hit a bit about this with some of the kind of testing on different phones, but when I think a lot of people are familiar maybe with kind of like standard DevOps procedures. How is that different when you're looking at kind of like a mobile DevOps procedure?
Concept wise, it's very similar. I mean, like I said before, it's like you're planning, you're coding, you're building, testing, releasing, deploying, monitoring. Same kind of idea, methodology. But the tooling's different just because you're dealing with different platforms. So traditionally, you're most likely talking about websites or a web app, where there might be a front end and back end, and can all be deployed via like Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, Microsoft, etc., or like your own dedicated on-prem hosting, whatever it may be. But that's all deployed, and you can update that relatively quickly, and it's just different compared to mobile, where you're deploying both generally server-side code and then actual apps to stores that are not really in your control. So that's where it's complicated. So like traditionally, if there's a bug that you just deployed, you can patch it quickly on a website. Versus a mobile app, if something is just deployed that's buggy, you have to stop the release to either the Google Play subscribers or the Apple subscribers to your app, and then you have to release a patch, which has to go through the review process, which takes time. So you just need to be extra careful here. And then in terms of the tooling, really everything's different. So there's mobile specific tools for really like from a coding standpoint, programming languages. There's the native code is different programming languages. So you have Swift on iOS and Objective C, and then Java and Kotlin on Android. And then where you build is different. There's different IDEs or development environments. Testing is different because you want to test on physical phones. Sometimes you do that with web, but it's a little bit different how you install and whatnot. Unit testing is similar, and those should be run on both platforms or all platforms. Then UI and or device testing that's automated, definitely completely different than web. There's not as much of a need to do it on physical hardware, like in a data center where you can access like 300 plus Android and iOS devices, versus like emulating them or simulating them, just because you need specific hardware pieces that may act differently in a simulator emulator versus the actual device. Then I mentioned the deployment's a bit different. I mean, both cases you'll stage it and try to roll it out to only a subset of users, but the rollout process is different because you do have to deal with the app stores versus just your own hosting or a cloud provider. And then the monitoring. Some of the tools are similar to like traditional web monitoring tools for like traffic, like in this case, it's crashes versus and errors versus just like errors or exceptions on web. But like I said, it's all really the same, but just the tooling is different, and some of the stages are a bit different, but process and like concept wise, it's the same.
That's great. And so if a company is looking to get started with setting up kind of a mobile DevOps system, how would you recommend, or how would someone get started there?
Yeah, so there's a number of different kind of tools out there to just start the basics, where we generally start is like, all right, let's get this building without a developer needing to build that. And really what that means is there's code generally hosted on either GitHub or Bitbucket, whatever it may be, for your code repository. Let's, on either every commit that a developer makes or every pull request or whatever it may be, let's get that building to ensure that the app is still building upon new code being added. So really, main idea there is If there's many developers, even if it's just two, besides just there may be just one lead and a support developer. As soon as there's another person there, it can complicate it, and there's additional code being added that needs to be reviewed, and can affect whether the app's building or not. So really, you just want to get this done so you can ensure that pull request or that new code is not going to break the previous building app. And then from there, you can add all these bits and pieces that I kind of talked about. Like, you can start automating your unit tests. You can start adding UI tests. You can start having workflows that run the app in a device farm. Generally, we do that like right before we release a new version. There's no need to do that on like every single new line of code, but you want to do that before you release. Then you create workflows that upload just to the app stores once you're ready to actually submit. So you can start small. Really, just initial goals generally are to automate and get it away from someone who's just managing the releases locally and not using a tool. And then you just scale upon that in terms of like adding more complexity to the workflows to make them more automated, and more hardened, secure, etc. So there's a number. Yeah, I would say that's the number one area to start, in my opinion.
Nice. That's amazing. And so if someone is getting started, what are some of the top tools? You've mentioned a bunch throughout this, but what are some of the top tools that you recommend someone looks at in their kind of DevOps workflow here?
Yeah. So I'm a big believer in utilizing anything that's already hosted. And what I mean by that is, like, traditionally you have some tools that you have to like spin up your own server and then host that DevOps tool like Jenkins. And then you have to set up a bunch of custom, whether they're plugins or custom code that you write, or scripts to do each one of these steps. So I tend to not go into it with this approach, because at the end of the day, if you end up using something that you're hosting yourself, you're going to have to support it. So I always say when I talk to our partners that we're working with, I never want to do DevOps on the DevOps server. So why are we trying to do that and host something ourselves? Let's use a service where it's going to be cheaper for us to just pay to have them manage it and make sure it's up and running at all times. So that's really the first place to start. And from a mobile perspective, we pretty much use at this point really only Bitrise. It's Bitrise. There's other providers in the space, but they've really, over the last 18 months, have been like the biggest player out there, and mostly mobile specific. There's others that do support mobile, but they also support web, so they're not as laser focused on mobile. And then the other big player out there was a company called BuddyBuild, but Apple acquired them, I think, about 2 years ago now. So they took them off the market. So at this point in time, it's really Bitrise, and the community for Bitrise is pretty large at this point. There's a lot of awesome open source components and scripts that you can add to your workflows that are well supported and provide you what you really need to integrate with all the different services that I started to mention, like Apple, Google, in terms of deployment, then testing. You can work with a number of different device farms. There's automations for like Amazon's device farm, Google's Firebase's device farm. And really the list goes on and on and on, for like code coverage, things like that. There's other add-ins that we use like CodeCov and whatnot. And then, I mean, once in a while we do have to write our own, but it's really plug and play. It makes it really super easy.
Nice. That's amazing. I know you've got a huge list there, but can you maybe list like 3 of your top other favorite tools that maybe, even if they're not mobile specific, that you guys are using in your workflows?
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, we need need really something like GitHub, Bitbucket. We tend to use GitHub the most to just keep code in a central repository. Then from there, we're pulling into Bitrise, and then personally, I like CodeCov because what we do is we'll prevent if we start decreasing code coverage in terms of like unit tests, that'll start blocking pull requests before even a developer even initiates reviewing the code. So the developer that committed the code knows right away that, all right, this build failed because there's not enough, I didn't write enough tests. So that means I have to go back and write some more tests before I can even put this new code with the corresponding tickets into ready for review, or dev QA, what we call it, where developers are testing the other developers' work. So we also use Firebase a lot. That's it's used for a mix of both development and additional tooling on top of that. But we'll use both their tools for their device farm that we plug into right into Bitrise, where we can just send a build and it automates out to them. Amazon Device Farm is key as well, where we do the same thing. For that, it takes a bit longer. We'll actually run the builds overnight, so it can run on a number of different devices, and then we'll look at the output the next day. Then for UI tests, we'll use different tools like Appium or native UI tests, whether it's Kotlin, Swift, etc. And then another good piece is like having a linter in there. So some developers use them locally, but you really want to have them in your DevOps process to make sure like everybody's code quality is the same, they're following the same patterns. And there's, depending on the programming language, there's different linters that are out there and available and pretty easy to integrate with your development environments, as well as like Bitrise or any other DevOps tool.
Nice. That's amazing. And so when companies think about kind of the ROI of mobile DevOps, I know a lot of companies maybe just want to like invest more into more features or something, but how do you think about the kind of the ROI of investing into this?
At the end of the day, the return on investment is a lot higher than most people realize on the onset. Once you start automating all this, it becomes a much easier, like it turns into almost a machine where it's actually running like a full circle, where you don't have to wait for somebody to build something for someone to test it. So I would say that's like one of the biggest areas, especially if you have a decent sized development team and decent sized QA team, where you have features running in parallel, as well as like hot fixes, etc. Where if there's a feature ready for testing, a QA engineer can go right into Bitrise and find that feature, or if it's not already built, if they need to build a specific branch, depending on like how the DevOps tool is set up and like how the workflows are set up. If they have to manually build it, they can just click a button. So instead of someone having to do a number of different scripts or commands locally, which takes, like I said, 30 minutes, someone can just go into a website or dashboard and click a button. So it saves hours and hours and hours. And then in terms of like the actual release, once again, it's a click of a button to build the app and deploy it to the store. And then because it's more stable, it's going through more rigorous testing that are both manual and automated, you get a much better end product, where that's where you don't have to worry as much in terms of like any crashes, things of that nature. So
yeah, makes sense. And then if someone's looking at starting to build this out, do you recommend they build that out internally or externally, or how do you recommend a mobile app company start building this out?
Yeah, it really depends on the internal team skill set. I mean, once again, from like a like the DevOps tools itself, like the core tool, I'd recommend a hosted solution like Bitrise. I mean, even it's relatively cheap on the low end, depending on how many concurrent builds you need. It can be as cheap as like $100 a month, compared to you having to spend a developer spending like maybe 10, 20, 30, 40 plus hours a month. So just like kind of do that math and what that would come out to. But then from there, in terms of, do we do this internally from like, or bring in another company? It depends on the team skill set. So there's some development teams that really don't have the expertise and the know-how and know what these tools are, how to implement them. They're really just used to developing and building native app experiences. So it's kind of it's a little bit, they definitely overlap. So where it's like the technical and development expertise as well as DevOps expertise, they overlap, but there's some teams that don't have the DevOps expertise, but do have the development expertise. So depending on what you can handle, just will dictate whether you should try to do it in-house or at least bring in someone to do your initial setup and analysis of what is needed for your company. And then from there, once it's set up, you can in theory update it and optimize it yourself after the initial setup.
Yeah, that's great. And so final piece here, just what final advice would you give to, any company with a mobile app that is, really trying to implement and get started with mobile DevOps? Any final words of advice?
I mean, start as soon as possible. If you're supporting even a small app to an app with millions of users, if you automate this, you're going to see real improvements in terms of like the ability to release like new product updates quicker, and just real efficiency at the end of the day. It's going to be a lot better for the team and team morale, where they don't have to constantly continue building an app manually.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, thanks again for coming on here and taking the time to share all this, Sean.
Awesome. Appreciate it.